Welcome to Nikki's Nightmares, where chilling tales come to life. In today's terrifying story, we step into the unsettling reality of stalking, where obsession hides behind kindness and fear builds slowly in the shadows. What begins as harmless attention quickly spirals into fixation, control, and a presence that refuses to disappear. These true encounters reveal how easily boundaries can be crossed and how terrifying it becomes when someone decides they're not going to let you go. If you love scary stories, paranormal encounters, and true horror experiences, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join me as we delve into the deep, dark, and the mysterious. Stalking doesn't always begin the way people expect. There's no dramatic moment, no clear warning, no sudden shift into danger. Instead, it starts quietly, a glance that lingers just a little too long, a message that feels slightly out of place, a presence that seems to follow, but never quite reveals itself. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Most people imagine stalking as something tied to relationships, a jealous ex, a former partner who refuses to let go. But the truth is far more unsettling. A stalker doesn't need to know you. They don't need a reason. All they need is focus. There are 4 warning signs, 4 patterns that, when they begin to overlap, signal something much darker taking shape: fixated, obsessive, unwanted, and repeated. At first, those behaviors can be easy to dismiss. A message here, a coincidence there. But stalking isn't about isolated moments, it's about patterns, a slow, methodical escalation designed to erode your sense of safety piece by piece. It begins with attention, not the kind that feels flattering, but the kind that feels wrong. You notice the same person showing up in places they shouldn't be, not once, but again and again. A grocery store, a parking lot, or outside your workplace. Each encounter just plausible enough to explain away, until it isn't. Then, the communication starts. At first, it might seem harmless, a message from an unknown number, a simple "hey," a question that feels too familiar, coming from someone you don't recognize. You ignore it, but it doesn't stop. The messages continue, growing more frequent, more personal, more invasive. They begin to reference things they shouldn't know: your schedule, your routines, the places you visit when you think no one is paying attention. And suddenly, the distance between you and them begins to feel very small. That's when the monitoring begins. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it's subtle. A car parked down the street longer than it should be. A figure across the road, standing still, watching. Other times, it's something more deliberate, tracking your movements, learning your patterns, studying your life, from a distance close enough to feel your presence, but far enough to remain unseen. You start to question everything, every shadow, every unfamiliar face, every moment you thought you were alone. Then come the reminders, unwanted, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. A note left where only you would find it, an object just out of place, something small but intentional, a message without words. I was here, and worse, I can come back. For some, it escalates further, threats that aren't always spoken directly, but implied, a shift in tone, a sense that the line between observation and action is beginning to blur. Damage to property, disturbances that feel targeted, moments that leave you standing in your own home, no longer certain it's safe. Because stalking isn't just about watching, it's about control, about power, about slowly forcing someone to live in a state of constant awareness. where every sound feels intentional and every silence feels like a warning. And the most disturbing part, it doesn't always look dangerous from the outside. It can be mistaken for persistence, for affection, for something almost romantic. But there is nothing harmless about it, because when attention becomes fixation, when curiosity becomes obsession, when contact becomes unwanted and never stops repeating, that's when it becomes something else entirely, something that doesn't just follow you, but begins to surround you. So before we step into tonight's real stories, remember this: stalking isn't defined by one moment, it's defined by patterns, and sometimes, by the time you recognize those patterns, they've already been watching you for a very long time. Kindness turned obsession. This is something I still struggle to talk about because it didn't begin with fear. It began with kindness. This wasn't someone I knew well, not a partner, not a friend, just an acquaintance. At the time, I didn't understand his intentions or what his behavior would slowly become. What I thought was a simple good deed turned into a year-long nightmare. I met him through a small community group I used to attend. He was older, much older than me, and people often spoke about how he was struggling. He lived alone, and his wife had passed not long before. There were quiet conversations about how he didn't have much, how he was barely getting by. I remember feeling sorry for him. So one afternoon, while I was baking for my own father, I made extra, a simple cake, nothing special, something he could freeze, something easy. I told myself it was just a small act of kindness, and at first, that's exactly what it felt like. Not long after, I started noticing him more. He would be waiting when I arrived at the group, not coincidentally, but deliberately, positioned where he could see me walk in. At first, he was polite, soft-spoken, grateful. But that changed, slowly. He began to take up more of my time, interrupting conversations I was having with other people, steering every interaction back to himself, asking for advice he didn't actually want, just to keep me there, focused on him. It became constant. No matter who I spoke to, he would appear. No matter where I stood, he would find me. I tried to gently redirect him, suggested other people in the group who could help him more than I could. But it didn't matter. He wasn't looking for help, he was looking for me. So I started creating distance, spending more time with others, keeping conversations short, trying to make it clear, without saying it outright, that I needed space. But that didn't stop him. If anything, it made things worse. He began waiting outside for me, standing there, just watching until I left. And when I did, he would fall into step beside me, walking me to my car like it was the most natural thing in the world. I remember the first time he showed up at my house. He said he was just dropping off a thank you card, a harmless excuse. But after that, his car started appearing on my street, at first occasionally, then more often. He told people he liked walking in the area, but now he had a reason to stop by, and he did, over and over and over again. I would come home from work and see his car parked nearby, and instead of pulling in, I would keep driving, circling the block, waiting, hoping he would leave. I changed the times I came home, the times I left. I adjusted my entire routine just to avoid him. But even then, I didn't call it stalking, just irritating, uncomfortable, something I could manage. That's what everyone else said too. People laughed it off, called it a harmless infatuation, made jokes about his age, like that somehow made it less serious. To them, It was almost cute. To me, it was becoming something else entirely. When I tried to avoid him more directly, his behavior shifted. There was anger now. He would confront me, demanding to know what he had done wrong, why I was treating him this way. Leaders from the group eventually stepped in. They spoke to him, told him clearly that his behavior was inappropriate, that it was harassment, that he needed to leave me alone. He didn't take it well. There was resentment in the way he looked at me after that, a quiet kind of anger that never fully left. For a while things calmed down, but he never stopped watching. During group sessions, I could feel it. His eyes fixed on me from across the room, constant, unblinking, waiting, and then, slowly, it started again, more frequent appearances, more persistence, except now, it wasn't just the group, it was everywhere. If I went to an event, he was there. If I played sports, he was there. Even when I was at the hospital with my daughter, he was there. That's when the fear truly set in. I went to the police. I told them everything. But they asked me a question I didn't know how to answer. Had he threatened me? No, not directly. And without that, there was nothing they could do. So I stopped going to the group entirely. I left behind a place that once felt safe, just to get away from him. Eventually, the group leaders took it more seriously. They warned him clearly that if he contacted me again, it would be reported as stalking. Only then did it begin to slow. But by that point, the damage was already done. For an entire year, I lived differently. I changed my routines, my habits, the way I moved through my own life, all because of someone I barely knew, someone who decided that my kindness meant something more. People like to call that kind of attention flattering. It isn't. When someone refuses to respect your boundaries, when they insert themselves into your life without permission, when they make you feel watched, followed, trapped, that isn't affection. It's obsession. And obsession isn't rational. Looking back, I wish I had said something sooner. I wish I had trusted that quiet discomfort instead of brushing it aside. I wish I had called it what it was from the very beginning, because you don't have to wait until it escalates. You don't have to wait until you're afraid. If it feels wrong, it is wrong. Call it out, name it, and don't let anyone convince you it's harmless. Because sometimes the most terrifying situations don't start with fear. They start with something that feels like kindness. The ride I should have refused. I used to work with a man who was much older than me, old enough to be my father. We weren't in the same department, but close enough that we crossed paths often. I made the mistake of being kind to him, not overly friendly, not inviting, just polite. The kind of polite you have to be when you're trying to avoid tension at work. But to him, it meant something more. No one else really talked to him. I noticed that pretty quickly. People kept their distance, avoided eye contact, kept conversations short. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just didn't want to be another person making his day worse. So I smiled when I saw him, said hello, made small talk, and somehow that was enough. He started showing up in my department more and more. At first it seemed harmless. He'd linger nearby, offer to help, sometimes even start doing parts of my job without asking. I didn't like that. I preferred doing my own work. It gave me something to focus on, something normal. But I didn't know how to tell him to stop without making things awkward, so I let it happen longer than I should have. Then one day, my car wouldn't start. It was late, I was tired, and I didn't feel like walking miles just to get home. When he offered me a ride, I accepted without thinking twice. It felt like a simple favor, a one-time thing. I didn't realize I had just opened a door I couldn't close. After that night, he started showing up at my house. At first, it was occasional. A knock at the door, asking if I wanted to hang out, or grab food, or just talk. I let him in a few times because I didn't want to be rude. I told myself he was just lonely, that it would pass. But it didn't. It became constant. Every day. At work. Outside of work. There was no separation anymore. I started avoiding my own home, driving around just to waste time, or sitting in parking lots until I was sure he wouldn't be there. Sometimes I'd pretend I wasn't home at all. Lights off, phone silent, barely breathing when I heard him outside. He didn't take that well. That's when things changed. He started appearing in places I never told him about. A movie theater I went to with friends. He was there. A mall across town. Somehow he was there too. Fast food stops, random errands. Even my mom's house. Every time I turned around, he was just there, watching, smiling like it was coincidence. It didn't feel like coincidence. I couldn't understand how he kept finding me until a friend decided to take a closer look at my car. And that's when we found it, a small tracker, hidden where I never would have noticed, quiet, invisible, always watching. Once I removed it, he couldn't follow me anymore, and that's when he became desperate. At work, he stopped pretending. He started cornering me, trapping me in spaces where I couldn't easily leave. One time, he blocked my way completely. Before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, he forced himself on me, his hand gripping me, his mouth. I panicked. I bit him hard. The moment I got free, I ran straight to management, shaking, barely able to speak. But it didn't matter, because it had all been caught on camera, every second of it. He was fired immediately, but that didn't undo what had already happened. I moved not long after that, didn't tell anyone where I was going, except family. I blocked him everywhere I could, tried to erase every trace of myself that he could find. I did see him once, in a store. He was with his wife, and I wasn't alone. I left immediately. I never went back there again. Because once someone decides to follow you, once they decide you belong to them, even when it's over, it never really feels like it is. Trapped with my stalker. I ended up in that house at one of the lowest points in my life. It was years ago, after a breakup, after things had fallen apart in ways I didn't expect. I didn't have anywhere stable to go, so I rented a small room in a boarding house. It wasn't much, just a narrow space at the end of a dim hallway, but it was somewhere I could close a door and be alone. At least, that's what I thought. There was another tenant, around my age. I remember the first time I saw him clearly. I had just stepped out of the shower and was walking back to my room when I noticed him standing in the hallway. He didn't look away. He just stared, long enough that it felt wrong, but I brushed it off, told myself it was nothing, just an awkward moment between strangers. The next day, there was a note slipped under my door. It was friendly, casual, introducing himself, saying I could come to him if I needed anything, or if I wanted to hang out. At that point in my life, I didn't have many people. I was tired of feeling alone. So, I responded. We started talking, spending time together in small ways, just enough to make it feel like I had someone in that house who wasn't a stranger. But it didn't stay normal for long. It became obvious quickly that he wanted more than friendship. And the more I learned about him, the more something felt off. He had multiple children, all with different women, and none of them lived with him. Some he wasn't even allowed to see alone. Others had been taken far away from him entirely. He talked about it in fragments, like pieces of a story that didn't quite fit together, and he drank, not casually, not socially, but deliberately. He admitted it himself. He drank until he blacked out, just to escape whatever was going on in his head. That's when things started to change. One night, he was completely gone, shouting, slurring, making enough noise that I was afraid the landlady would call the police. I thought maybe I could calm him down, so I made the mistake of going into his room. The moment I stepped inside, everything shifted. He grabbed me hard, pinned my arms to my sides, forced me down, his weight pressing me into the floor so I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly. For a second, I didn't even understand what was happening, just that I couldn't get free. Somehow, I did. I don't remember exactly how, just the feeling of tearing away, running, getting out of that room as fast as I could. The police were called that night, but he wasn't removed, and after that, something in him changed. Whatever guilt he felt didn't make him stop. It made him worse. That's when the stalking began. He started watching me, tracking when I left, when I came back, how long I was gone. I would find more notes under my door, not friendly anymore, but angry, accusing. The one I remember most read like a rambling manifesto, pages of it, insisting I was lying to him about seeing someone else. He wrote that he had tested me, that he placed a cigarette between my door and the frame, and when it hadn't fallen or been crushed, it meant I hadn't come home, which meant to him I had to be with another man. It didn't matter that none of it was true. In his mind, it was. And the messages didn't stop there. Texts would come in, telling me I deserved bad things, that I had used him, all because I refused to be what he wanted me to be. I had only been living there for a few weeks, but it felt like something much longer, like time had stretched into something suffocating, something that followed me even when I locked my door. I stopped feeling safe, even inside my own room. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, measured, judged, so I left. I didn't wait for things to get worse. I found a small studio, far more expensive than I could comfortably afford, and I moved everything out in a single window of time when I knew he wouldn't be there. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I just disappeared, because sometimes the only way to survive something like that is to make sure the person watching you never sees you again. The story ends here, but the terror does not. Join me again. Like, comment, and subscribe if you dare.